Hey everyone, it is Harlan Kilstein here, and I'm here with the Dogington Post. And Dogington Post and Merrick are presenting our Dogington Post University. Merrick proudly sponsors us, and we're really happy about that because the best dog ever deserves the best food ever. The best dog ever deserves Merrick. You see, Merrick Pet Care is a sponsor of Dogington University, and if you open up a can of Merrick and you look inside, it looks like real dog food. And that's because that's exactly what it is. It's real food. There are chunks of recognizable chicken. There are chunks of vegetable. When they say chicken, vegetables, and rice, not only are those the ingredients, but it looks like it. It looks like the kind of food that you would serve your family because, after all, isn't your dog a member of your family? So for quality food, check out our good friends at Merrick. Now, Merrick is proud to sponsor us tonight, and we're going to be introducing Kevin. Now, what we're going to be talking about tonight is a topic that isn't normally addressed. And our friends at Merrick want you to pay attention because there's actually a reward for paying attention. Merrick, you can get Merrick for your fur kids or for your cats at Petco, Pet Independent specialty stores. I pick up mine at my Whole Foods. Recipes are made with real meat. There's never anything from China in Merrick food. And what we're going to be focusing on tonight are the new grain-free, gluten-free dog treats. I can tell you that Kalba loves them, and she's a real big fan of them. So what we want you to know is that when you pay attention during our webinar, it's an opportunity to win big because you can win these Power Bite treats. They will send you 4 bags of the Power Bite treats for being the first person to answer a question correctly at the end. Now, I'm going to warn you now, we have the smartest and fastest dog owners in the world. And as soon as I say the question, no matter how hard we make the question, you guys attending Dogington Post University know the answer and type it in just as soon as I finish saying it. So make sure that you are paying attention and make sure that you are able to answer. Merrick will also donate 4 bags to a rescue of your choice, and we'll tell you more about that at the end. You can follow Merrick on their Facebook page, Merrick Pet Care, and you can follow them also on Twitter and Instagram. Now, stick with us because after the conversation is over, if you have more questions, they'll be continuing the conversation on their Merrick Facebook page. So if you have more questions for Kevin or questions about Merrick treats, that's where you should go. Plus, if you go to the Merrick Facebook page tonight and look for a post about Merrick treats, there will be a link to a coupon where you can save $1 off on these treats. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, Kevin Duggan. He's a reward-based certified professional dog trainer. His mission is to build positive relationships between people and their 4-legged companions. He's been training dogs for 5 years. Many of you know him from his popular Ask the Trainer column on the Dogington Post. Kevin believes that you can successfully train any dog using clear communication and trust, never fear or pain. I have to tell you, Kevin, I've been getting questions in advance of this webinar, so we're really going to put you on your toes today. So everybody, go ahead and get your questions ready because this is going to be a fascinating, informative, exciting webinar. And pay attention because you could be our lucky winner. Ready? Ready for me, Kevin, to switch things over to you?
Yes, sir. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I know there's a lot of people on here with a lot of concerns and questions and everything, so we're going to get to those here at the end. Once again, my name is Kevin Duggan, certified professional dog trainer, owner, operator of All Dogs Go to Kevin, located in Kent, Ohio. And as Harley mentioned there, kind of my motto, slogan, building positive relationships between humans and their canine companions. So we're going to kind of jump to the next slide. I'm going to keep this one.
I'm just letting you know, Kevin, there are already questions coming in today.
Well, hopefully I can cover them as we're going here with the slides and everything. So I'm going to try to keep this to about an hour this time, so I'm going to be going through these kind of quickly. I'm going to be talking a little quick, but I'm going to try to keep it clear. Just real quick about me, located in Kent, Ohio. It's like between Cleveland and Akron, Northeast Ohio. Certified trainer through the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. It's a governing board. Long story short, dog training is an unregulated industry. If you're looking to hire a trainer, something that isn't a bad idea is to look for a certified trainer. Being certified doesn't mean that they're the greatest trainer necessarily, so still do your research, but it's a good place to start. A Canine Good Citizen Evaluator through the AKC. Basically, that's just a certification that your dog can get that it takes a little bit of work, a little bit of practice, a little bit of training, but when you get that certification, it says that your dog is good to go in public. It can manage itself, obviously, with you still there. And as Harley mentioned as well, I'm an author for the Dogington Post. I have a column that I do a Q&A, so you guys can submit questions. There's a link on the Dogington Post website where you can submit questions. And I also write some kind of freelance stuff on there and all that good stuff. So moving on. Some of these slides, if you guys were here last Tuesday, the first couple of slides are going to be the same, but I have to kind of cover these same topics, and then we're going to jump into new stuff, so bear with me here. What makes a good treat for training? Something that's soft, chewy, small, and tasty are 4 adjectives that I chose intentionally because when we're using treats for training, we need to make sure that the dog can, well, first off, the dog has to enjoy it, and we need to make sure that the dog gets it down the hatch fairly quickly, if you will, because in certain situations, and in the situations that I'm going to be speaking about here in a few slides, we're going to be doing lots of little treats, and we need to basically move with the process here. We can't wait for the dog to chew it and then it takes 5 minutes. We need to, make it happen quickly. So those 4 adjectives are very important. Additionally, something made in the USA is great, sourced in the USA is great. We want to, here in America, the regulations are kind of lax, if you will, so we want to make sure we research where we're getting our treats and our food from. Merrick's a great company. You don't have to do any research when it comes to them. They keep it, they make it all out there so you can see it very easily. Made with all natural ingredients. Merrick's right on board with that. So that's just really quickly what makes a good treat for training. We're going to jump into the next slide here. Why are treats used? What are they used for? And ultimately, one of the things is positive reinforcement. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of the terminology positive reinforcement. What positive reinforcement is in a nutshell, the dog does a behavior, we give the dog something it enjoys directly after that behavior happens. That behavior is very likely to happen again. In order for this to work, we have to be giving the dog something it enjoys. Just as an example, say maybe some dogs like to be pet on top of the head. Well, maybe your dog doesn't like to be pet on top of the head. If you try to pet him on top of the head after he does a behavior and he doesn't like it, that's not a form of positive reinforcement. So you need to make sure that it's something the dog enjoys. Treats are just a really simple way to do it because as long as you find a tasty one, you can use them and you can have a lot of success with them. I do use toys and sometimes as well, but treats are primarily what I'm using. The cool thing about it is dogs will work to receive one. So just as we go to work for paychecks, guess what? Dogs like to get paid too. And you'll notice a big difference when you go from a style of training that you're not paying to a style of training that you are paying. The results that you'll get, it's just such a big difference. And the next bullet point, as it says there, it really is fun. I'm what's considered a crossover trainer, so I started off doing very physical, hands-on methods with dogs, and once I switched to doing it the way I do it now, I thoroughly have fun training my dog, and he enjoys it too. So definitely, it's fun. And then the final bullet point there, they can be paired with the word to increase the value of the word. If you ever heard of clicker training, they can be paired with a clicker as well, and then the clicker all of a sudden has value. It's classical conditioning 101, basically. We can do that with a word as well. When I'm working with a dog, say it's a male dog, I'll say good boy. If I'm working with a female, I say good girl. But what I do is I say the word, and then directly what follows is a treat, which then makes that word and or that clicker a predictor of treats Therefore, the dog likes hearing that word and or the clicker. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, though. But positive reinforcement is the best known way currently to train behaviors with your dog. The side effects, there really aren't any. There's no, the dog is enjoying it. So there's a lot of fun there. But anyway, so we're going to be using them in that aspect. Last week, I mentioned that I would be talking about counter conditioning and classical conditioning and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be diving into that here shortly to give other examples of how treats can be used to fix unwanted behavior. So moving on to the next slide, some of the common behavioral issues that we're going to be talking about today, lack of socialization, reactivity issues, and anxiety issues. Lack of socialization, it's not necessarily a behavioral issue, but it has its own separate bullet point because I'm going to start off by talking about socialization, then I'm going to talk about reactivity issues, which you'll see how that mixes in, and then finally we'll be talking about anxiety issues. We're going to be talking about primarily separation anxiety today. Now, I chose these topics because recently I was actually working an adoption event for the local APL, or one that we attended, and there was a lot of different rescues there. And really, I was kind of just sitting back and observing all the dogs, and a lot of the issues that these dogs had were reactivity issues, and then because of that lack of socialization, and I'm going to dive more into that. But it made me start thinking, why is this happening? And basically, when you have these dogs that are stuck in shelters. How do I want to word this? Not stuck in cages, but stuck in runs. They have like cage runs like that. They really don't get socialized very well. I mean, they'll see people here and there, but the dogs that they're with, they don't really get to mingle with in most cases. So that's where a lot of times some of this reactivity issues come from, and we're going to kind of go from there. In regards to the anxiety issues, well, let me say one thing here too. These issues aren't just from rescue dogs. Not every rescue dog is going to have any of these issues. You can go to a rescue or shelter and find an awesome dog that has no issues. But these are just some common issues that any dog can have, and that I've seen that rescue dogs can have. So moving on to the next slide. Really quick, that's Ducky. She was adopted from the APL. She's one of my favorites. Just wanted to point that out. So socialization, what is it? So I kind of little bullet point here. Socialization is the association that your dog has with the things that it encounters in everyday life. Examples: people, places, objects. So basically what your dog encounters. If you're walking down the street and a car goes by, that's what I would refer to as a socialization experience. So when that thing goes by, your dog notices it. Your dog's going to have one of three experiences with that. It's going to be a positive experience, a negative experience, or a neutral experience. My overall goal is to get the dog to have positive experiences with everything. I want them to think that everything is awesome. Because, for instance, a garbage truck is a good example. If you have a garbage truck go by and it makes a lot of noise, it might scare your dog. Your dog might be a little frightful, or fearful, frightful, whatever. But what happens with repetition of that, all of a sudden your dog starts saying, okay, when I see garbage trucks, I get scared, and that behavior gets worse and worse and worse. So when we do socialization, if we do it the correct way, we can get dogs to enjoy the presence of just about anything, and I'm going to explain that coming up here shortly. But socialization, this takes place over the dog's entire life. It's primarily, when puppies are born, or when dogs are born as puppies, the first 16 weeks they say is the most important. This is when they're the most sponge-like, if you will. So every encounter that they have with things is so important. And when you're dealing with, still in general, when you're dealing with these dogs, you really want to minimize or minimalize the negative experiences, because the more negative experiences your dog has in life, the more, potentially the more fearful it's going to be, which could bring out reactivity issues and all that good stuff. Well, that's not good stuff. That's just terminology there. But so that's kind of socialization in a nutshell. So moving on, how not to do it. I have a couple bullet points here. I got dog parks. I've got flooding. I've got physically meeting every person and dog you come across. Now, dog parks, they sound like a fantastic idea, but the reason why I say do not socialize your dog at a dog park is because everything at a dog park is basically out of your control. There's dogs off leash everywhere. I mean, it's a dog park. When you're socializing your dog, you want to have everything under your control. You need to be basically a control freak with this, because it only takes a couple bad, as I mentioned, negative experiences for you to have a dog that could potentially be mentally a little, not well off because of that. So I like to avoid dog parks in that manner. Flooding, for those of you who are not familiar with the term flooding, basically that's when your dog is nervous about something, and then you just take whatever that is and you just throw them all at the dog. An example would be if you were scared of heights and I said, you know what, you're going to deal with this by me sticking you on a cliff and deal with it. So you're scared of heights, I just stick you on a cliff and say deal with it. That would be an example of flooding. It's really just not conducive toward the socialization. Really, it's not conducive to anything in regards to dogs or people for that matter. I mean, some people maybe, but overall, it's just not conducive. And I have here physically meeting every person and dog you come across. That might sound a little silly. You're like, what are you talking about? But, people maybe not as bad, but dogs, every dog you come across isn't necessarily going to be a good dog for your dog to meet. I kind of give this rule of thumb. First off, if you want your dog to meet the other dog, I always ask the owner first, hey, can my dog meet your dog? And depending upon that answer is what the outcome is. And I always say if that human hesitates at all, just say no thank you and walk away, because if they're hesitating, that means that something might have happened in the past. And like I said, we don't want anything bad to happen. We want to keep it positive. So physically meeting every person, that's not so bad realistically, unless the person really doesn't want to see your dog. But, every dog I definitely don't recommend. Definitely ask first and kind of go from there. So that's in a nutshell how not to do it. But socialization, how to do it. Small increments from a distance. I have in parentheses, look at that, which I'm going to explain a little bit here. I have using dog parks properly, in which it might seem a little silly when I just said things about dog parks like that, in structured classes. This photo here of myself, and that's my dog V, that's in Erie, PA. We were doing a workshop/training class, and that is an example of a structured class where dogs are on leash, there's space in between them. That's a good example of how you can socialize dogs without really anything negative happening. Now, I have my dog off leash, but he's trained well enough that I wasn't worried about him going over to other dogs and stuff. I can call him back to me. So, in most classes, you won't have off-leash dogs until they're ready for that. But using the dog parks properly, too, one thing that I do, and I'm going to mention this in regards to the reactivity issues, what I'm coming up to next. One thing that I do with dog parks is I'm a fan of them. I use them when from the outside. So when you have a dog park that's completely fenced in, I will use that for socialization as I stay on the outside. So your dog can look at all these other dogs, but nothing bad can happen in theory. And I play the game called Look at That. So when my dog or the dog I'm working with looks at that other dog, I say good boy, and then I give them a treat. With repetition of that, what ends up happening is those dogs become predictors of good things. So my dog will go, oh, every time I look at another dog, I get treats. Hey, I like when other dogs are around. And that's the general idea too. Hey, when here comes a garbage truck, well, when I look at a garbage truck, I get treats. When I look at people, I get treats, etc., etc. So you can do socialization without having to physically get the dog to another dog or meeting another person and stuff like that. You can do it with distance. And hey, there's the bullet point from a distance. So you can play that look at that game. Structured classes, with puppies, they do puppy classes that a lot of them have great puppy playtime built into it. So that way, at the end, they do get to have some time to play around with each other. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. Ultimately, though, we want to avoid those negative experiences. I give an example like this. You might have a dog that's absolutely fantastic with people, and this is going to be a bad example, but it's a good one at the same time. It's going to sound drastic, but just bear with me here. Say your dog, who's great with people, meets 3 new people, and all 3 people in a row kick your dog. I know that sounds horrible, just an example. So say your dog then goes to meet a 4th person. There's a very good chance that your dog's going to be hesitant around meeting that 4th new person because of that negative experience, that negative socialization experience. Now, like I said, that might be a drastic kind of example, but I think it's an easy concept to understand. Now, if you do the exact opposite, your dog meets 3 people in a row and all 3 people give him a treat, well, on that 4th person that he meets, there's a good chance he's going to be anticipating something good happening, and he's going to be excited to see them. I mean, ultimately, we don't want an overexcited dog, but we want a dog to enjoy the presence of other dogs, people, everything like that. So it's kind of it in a nutshell. So we're going to move on here. We are going to jump right into reactivity. And what is it? So reactivity, and I use the term loosely, a reactive dog is a dog that reacts, barks, lunges, etc., towards things. Examples would be people, objects, dogs. So sees that you're walking down the street with your dog and there's a person on the other side of the street walking, your dog decides to bark at it, maybe even lunge in that direction. An example of an object would be a car. That might sound silly, but there's a lot of dogs that react to cars. Some of it could be herding instincts, but some of it also can be what the next slide is going to entail. But so that's just a couple examples. And yeah, so like I said, I use the term very loosely. If I say you have a reactive dog, that's not an insult. That just means your dog reacts to things. And I've dealt with a reactive dog myself, so take no offense. And I'll maybe I'll mention him a little bit here, but we'll see what time has in store for us. So the next slide is reactivity, what causes it? So I have a picture of a little dog, one of my clients. I have a picture of a leash, and I have a picture of a fence. So you're probably like, well, what is there a leash and a fence on there for? Well, there's something that's known as barrier frustration. And what that is when there's a barrier or something that's preventing the dog from getting what it wants or getting to what it wants. So like, for instance, a fence, if there's a dog on the other side of that fence, like your dog is on the other side of that fence, and there's somebody walking a dog down the street, your dog might start getting frustrated because it cannot get to that dog, and barking might ensue, and it might get a little more and more escalated. Typically with repetition of this, it gets worse and worse and worse. So you have a dog that becomes even more reactive. A great example is on leash. That can also be considered a barrier because it's preventing the dog from getting to what it wants. So that leash, you're walking down the street, your dog's on leash, and there's another dog across the street. Your dog maybe wants to go see the other dog, but because of that leash, frustration kicks in, and then reactivity kicks in. So barrier frustration plays a part in it. Fear actually plays a good part in it too. Your dog may be fearful of what it's seeing, and it might be playing this kind of, how I phrase it, as I'm going to get you before you get me, or the dog puts on a show to make it look tougher than it actually is. So it's basically trying to look tough. So it's sitting there barking and growling, saying, you better go away, you better go away. And that could be another cause of the reactivity. But I'm going to just kind of be talking about these two things now, or excuse me, these couple of reasons. Just for instance, on that adoption event that I mentioned a little bit earlier, these dogs, it was later in the afternoon, these dogs all come from shelters and everything, and they're used to being in their runs. They're not, they're used to being around other dogs, but not in this situation. So there's probably 20 or 30 dogs at this adoption event, and they're all on leash, they're all in a new environment. I mean, it was just very stressful for all of them, so that's why part of this was happening too. But so stress plays a huge part in it, stress and fear, but that leash plays a huge part in it. So we're going to get into how to make this better though. But first off, what we're going to do is talk about what not to do. And people's first reactions when they have a dog that's reacting, there you go, there's a good one for you. But they might want to yell at the dog, they might want to hit the dog, they might want to collar correct the dog. That's when you take the leash and you pop it. So if the dog has like a prong collar on, or a choke chain, or even a flat collar, but typically a choke or a prong collar is what's used for those, and they pop the collar, or excuse me, pop the leash to basically choke the dog a little bit, or the idea is to cause a little bit of pain or discomfort to get it to stop. Also, don't pin the dog to the ground. All these things, at best, they might stop the behavior at that point in time, but I'm here to tell you that it's not going to work the way you think it's working. There's something that's referred to as learned helplessness, and that's basically when the dog kind of realizes that there's no option, I just need to give up. I'm not going to get into that too much, but basically when you get into yelling, hitting, collar correcting, at best what you're going to do is kind of stop that behavior at that point in time, but you're not going to change the way the dog feels in that situation. Well, let me rephrase that. You actually will change the way the dog feels in that situation. You're going to make him even more fearful or even more frustrated, but he's just going to be scared to act upon it now, because if he acts upon it, he knows that something bad's going to happen. So what does that mean in the long run? Well, unless you're always there next to him to punish him, in the long run, there's a good chance that that behavior is going to rear its ugly head again, and it's going to be way, way worse because of all the, for lack of a better term, pain and discomfort in regards to the punishment that it's receiving. And these things that I have listed here, I mean, some of them might seem harsh, but I understand why people do them. Like I said, I've had a reactive dog. I work with reactive dogs for a living, and it can be frustrating. I understand why, but I'm here to give you better ways. I actually started off with my dog doing collar corrections with a choke chain. He was reactive to other dogs. He would bark, I would pop him, and the idea behind it was for him to stop. It was 4 or 5 years ago, so I can't exactly remember how well it worked in regards to at that point in time, but I am here to tell you that his issues ended up getting worse, and he ended up biting a couple dogs in different situations. What I ended up having to do was stick him into a rehabilitation program. It sounds worse than it was, but I rehabbed him myself, and it took me about a year of solid training, doing the things that I'm going to mention next to get him to enjoy the presence of other dogs. He now comes with me to work with other dogs in certain situations. He meets plenty of dogs now, and things are just going swimmingly. So we're going to get into that. The last bullet point isn't, it's just a good one to keep in mind. Never punish a dog for growling. Once again, your dog growls at something, people's first reaction is to say, no, stop that, bad dog, because you don't want him to growl. That makes sense. We don't want them to growl. But if a dog is growling, we need to remember that a dog is growling for a reason, and that reason is because that dog is uncomfortable. So realistically, if your dog growls, instead of saying, hey, bad dog, you really want to say, hey, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that you are uncomfortable. It is then your job as the handler, as the human, however you want to label yourself, to make your dog feel more comfortable, which we're going to jump into right now. So next slide, reactivity, what to do. Here's a picture of my dog V. Strategically picked this picture because he's looking at me. So the first bullet point is look at me. And that's a behavior that's awesome. If we can get him to look at me, that's fantastic. Fantastic, because if he's looking at me, he's not looking at the thing he's reactive to. So that's the first thing to start working on. And the way that I train this is I wait for the dog to look away. I say the dog's name, but you can say look at me, you can say watch me, you can say whatever cue you want. But get the dog to look at your face, say good dog, good boy, good girl, click, and then reward your dog with that treat. Do a lot of repetition of this. And do yourself a favor, start this off inside your house. Start it off with no distractions. Start slowly adding in distractions, like maybe grabbing some of your dog's toys, get his least favorite toys, and then get his more favorite toys. That's not the best way to say that, but anyway, get better toys, things that are more challenging for him, and practice this. Because if you try to play this game only when reactivity is happening, you're not going to have any success with it. Another bullet point on there is use high-value treats. That is so necessary, because if you're working with something like a crunchy bone thing, it's not going to work. You need something very tasty, very high value, and those, not to plug them here, but those Merrick Power Bites actually work out really well for this. I've been using them a lot, and they are coming in very handy. So that is all I'm going to say about this slide. We're going to move on to the next slide. So reactivity, and I have counter conditioning and I have desensitization. So these words, most of you have probably heard the term, desensitization. Counter conditioning is not as common as a word. It's not as common, for people to know. But I'm just going to give a brief little, just going to tell you guys about it real quick here. Counter conditioning is when you take something that the dog has a negative association about and you turn it into a predictor for awesome things. With repetition of this, your dog starts to enjoy the presence of the previously negative thing because it is becoming a predictor of for those awesome things. And then desensitization is the elimination or reduction of natural or acquired reactivity or sensitivity to an external stimulus. Basically, these two things work together, and I kind of look at it this way. If I'm walking down the street and I see that thing that my dog doesn't like, I'm waiting for him to see it. As soon as he sees it, I'm either going to click or I'm going to say, good boy, and I'm going to notice my voice tone there. I really get into it. I say, good boy, and I reward him I want it to be the exact instant that he sees it. And then with that's kind of counter conditioning in a nutshell. And then desensitization is basically when that thing is present, he's getting good things at the same time, which then desensitizes him to it. And you can see the little graphic here on the right. It explains classical conditioning, which is what counter conditioning stems from. Classical conditioning is when you take something that has no meaning to the dog, for instance, a bell, you ring the bell and then you give him food after. All of a sudden that bell starts becoming a predictor for food. And you can ring a bell and you're going to get the dog excited because he thinks food is on the way. An example of what you're probably dealing with, and this is pretty common, you grab your dog's leash out, dog goes crazy because he thinks he's going for a walk. When you first got that leash out, that meant nothing to the dog, but with repetition, all of a sudden, hey, when I see that leash, I get to go for an awesome walk. That has been classically conditioned. So we're basically going to use that same premise for something that the dog doesn't like. In the bottom graphic here, it uses the same example. It has a bell, and the dog doesn't like the sound of a bell. And then we have high-value food, dog likes that. So during the actual training, if you ring the bell and you give high-value food directly after, it says 1 to 2 seconds after, the dog says, woohoo. Dogs don't obviously really say woohoo, but the general idea there. And then ultimately, that thing that the dog didn't like before becomes a predictor of, hey, awesome things. So that's kind of the system that we go with in regards to that. So that's it in a nutshell. Yes, so we're going to move on to the next slide. Reactivity, distance is your friend. So this is one of the most important things that I like to point out to all my clients and anybody having this issue. Basically, if your dog is reactive to something, I guarantee you if you get your dog far enough away from that thing, your dog will stop reacting. Now, some of you are probably like, oh, yeah, right. Some dogs, it could be 20 feet away from it, they're okay. Some dogs, it could be 30 feet. Some dogs, it could be 50 yards of a football field. It could be 100 yards. There literally is a distance. It might be ridiculously far away, but there is a distance. One of my clients, who is actually one of my tougher clients, I'm sure I'm going to mention her more But she was reactive to everything, and I literally mean everything, from cars to people to dogs. Hey Maggie, if you're listening, I'm talking about Lucy. But everything. And we started off in their neighborhood, and we were walking down the street, and we were just going for a walk and trying to work on this reactivity, doing the desensitization and the counter conditioning. And long story short, when a car would go by, we would go pretty much into people's, like all the way up to their homes to try to get enough distance, and we were not getting enough distance. She was still reacting, and we were a good, 40, 50 yards away, and she was still reacting to these cars. So what we needed to do was to go to a place where we could find more distance, and we went to a local park that was, wide open, where it had all the things that we needed to work on. We had dogs, we had people, we had cars, and we did it strategically so that we weren't flooding her. I mentioned flooding earlier, how it's not conducive. So we did it strategically so we weren't flooding her, but we started off at a very far distance, and pretty much right away, since we started off at that successful distance, we were able to have cars go by and her not react. So what we did is, as soon as the car came into sight, we said, good girl, reward. And as that car is going by, good girl, reward, good girl, reward. All of a sudden, cars going by, there's no reason to react because good things are happening. So we were actually doing this, and as I mentioned, you can use dog parks to your advantage. We were doing this outside of a dog park, and we were a good distance away. But as these cars were going by, we had dogs in the dog park. There were people in there. And once again, I want to put emphasis on the fact that we were far away. We weren't right along the fence. That would be flooding. That's not conducive. So, but get that distance, find that distance, get your dog comfortable from that distance, and then slowly get closer and closer. It sounds, it's easier said than done. There's a lot of techniques. I want to actually plug one of my trainer friends. He's got some great videos. His name is Drayton Michaels in New Jersey. He's got on his YouTube channel, Pitbull Guru and Urban Dogs on YouTube, he's got some great videos on counter conditioning and desensitization where he explains this all as it's going on. But it also gives you great visuals of how quickly sometimes you need to move and how on your toes you need to be when doing something like this. So I'll try to make a note of that so you guys can see that. But once again, it's Urban Dogs on YouTube, Dogs, DAWGZ. There's just great videos on there. And I recommend a lot of my clients watch those videos just for refreshers and everything like that. But once again, the further away you are from the thing that your dog dislikes, the easier it is going to be for your dog to stay relaxed. I guarantee you, you will find a point where, and I'm using the term relaxed loosely too. I mean, your dog might not be fully relaxed, but your dog won't be reacting. So get to that point, find out where your dog's not reacting, start rewarding them for doing the right thing, and then slowly start getting closer and closer. Basically, if your dog is reacting, you are too close and you need to get a little bit further away. So think of it that way, and kind of work at, you can work at your dog's pace only. I mean, you can push them a tiny bit, and I literally mean a tiny bit further and further, but you cannot, if you try to push them too far too fast, you're just going to set them up for failure. You're going to end up flooding them, so don't do that. But distance is your friend. When in doubt, get more distance. If you're walking your dog and your dog starts freaking out and nothing's working, get more distance. It will help. If you can, lure your dog away, so put a treat right in front of his face and start pulling him away with the lure in front of his face. That way, being pulled away isn't a negative experience. In fact, it's kind of a positive one, so give that a shot. I'm going to keep moving along here, though. One of the most important things is knowing your environment. You need to look for your dog's triggers. You need to see your dog's triggers before he does. If he sees them before you, I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but it's you're fighting a battle there. So my goal is I'm walking down the street, I see that trigger, I'm looking at my dog's face, I'm waiting for his eyebrow to raise or whatever, for a sign that he sees it, and I'm marking it basically before he can even think twice about doing anything wrong. So we're walking, I see it, he sees it, good boy. And I mean, the faster you are at it, the better you're going to be, because if you're a split second too late, that reaction might occur, and then you're like, oh man. Another thing I want to point out is, when you have a reactive dog, one of your first things that you want to do is avoid these situations. You're like, here comes a dog, I don't want to deal with it. I'm here to tell you that if you want to make this better, you need to look at every situation that you can find as a training situation. So if you see a dog coming, take a deep breath, get your treats ready, and start the process. Go with this desensitization and counter conditioning. So your dog sees it, good boy, reward. One thing I want to point out too is, have the treats in your hand already. What you don't want to do is, you don't want to see a dog and then you reach in, you make a bunch of sound, and then you have the treats. Your dog can actually be classically conditioned that the sound of you reaching in is a trigger, the dogs are coming, which then it doesn't work the way that we want it to be. So keep that in mind. But know your environment. Some of my clients are almost, I want to say they're getting better than me at knowing their environment. And granted, we're in their neighborhoods, but their eyes, I've trained them so well to be, to look and keep their eyes open for these things. Whew, here we go. We're going quickly here. I hope everyone's comprehending all this because I'm talking fast, but we're limited on time, so we're going to keep moving. But I'm just going to sum all that up because we're going to move on to separation anxiety next. But so reactivity, what we want to do is counter conditioning and desensitization. I recommend using, a good body harness, like a freedom harness or something, to have more control over your dog. I'm really not a big fan of using the choke chains, prong collars, or shock collars, or anything like that, because from my experience, it can make it worse. There's going to be people out there that are going to say the opposite, and you know what? Everyone's got their opinion. But I've had firsthand experience using choke chains, and it made my dog's behavior worse. So I have anecdotal evidence in that way. So, but find a good distance. Slowly get your dog closer and closer to these things. Use high-value treats, and you need to see the trigger before your dog does. Now, once again, if your dog sees it before you, your best bet might be just to get more distance. So that's kind of reactivity in a nutshell, though. It can be challenging. It's not something that's you're not gonna be able to quote unquote fix it overnight. It's gonna take consistency. Lucy, the dog I mentioned earlier, we worked a good solid 3 months with her on this, and we started off where she couldn't be anywhere close to a dog. Just recently, she started going on group hikes with us, with other dogs on leash. So she's actually met a bunch of new dogs going on group hikes. So it works. It's just sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but this is the best way. You can actually change the way your dog feels about that situation. So, moving on. So, I mentioned that we're going to talk about anxiety a little bit. We're going to talk about separation anxiety. And the thing is, with separation anxiety, sorry, my dog's scratching himself. Maybe. So, probably hear him jingling in the background. So, hold on one sec. Maybe. Okay, so with separation anxiety, this is another, I want to say, it's fairly common in general with dogs. I forget the statistic, but millions of dogs in the United States alone suffer from separation anxiety. I want to say it was close to like 50%. I don't have actual statistics on that, so I might be wrong, but it's a common problem, and it is a huge pain for people and for dogs. I just put why. Why does it happen? And like I said, lots of dogs, they have issues with being left alone. They're kind of naturally social animals and are social beings, and when we leave them alone, it just doesn't sit well with them. Enter in the separation anxiety. But it causes stress and anxiety leading to destruction, like elimination in the house, copious amounts of drool, like I said, destruction. Here's a good picture where this dog tore up some pillows and what else, whatever you have there. So the first thing I'd like to point out, though, is we need to clarify, is this separation anxiety or is this boredom? A bored dog will get into trouble. So one of the first things I recommend is set up a camera. And put it in a place where you can see what your dog is doing, and set up that camera and leave just for 5 or 10 minutes. See what happens. If your dog kind of just casually walking around and looking at things to get into, then it's probably not anxiety, it's probably just a bored dog. But if you're gone and your dog is running to the windows, running to the doors, and it's panting and it's starting to drool, I don't know if you'll be able to tell or not with drool on the camera, but it's starting to do these behaviors, it's probably anxiety related. And then the next thing that usually happens is destruction of your stuff. Dogs will tear up windows, they'll tear, basically entry and exit points a lot of times become victim or fall victim to dogs with separation anxiety. And that's because they're just trying to get out. They're just trying to make themselves feel better. So they'll destroy everything from couches to carpets to, I'm sure plenty of you have dealt with dogs with separation anxiety and probably have lost a few things along the way in regards to items. But it's not your dog trying to get back at you for leaving. It's not your dog mad at you because you left and he didn't give you permission to leave. It's none of that stuff. Your dog is literally just trying to make himself feel better. And part of that, in dealing with anxiety too, it can cause the dogs to kind of flush their systems, if you will. So when you get into these anxieties, you'll be dealing with dogs that are, for the most part, really, really house trained in regards to not illuminating in the house. But when this anxiety kicks in, that goes out the window. Wait, that's not a good example. It then happens because they're not thinking, they're just trying to do anything they can do to make themselves feel better, and with this anxiety, it just causes them to flush out their bodies. Just as an example, a dog, if you give a dog a properly sized crate, like a cage crate, however you want to word it, they will not eliminate in that crate if it's properly sized because they won't want to sit in their own filth. Now, realistically, if a dog really, 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 really has to go, they might go because they just physically couldn't hold any longer. But the one exception, or a exception, is dogs with separation anxiety. They'll be in a crate, and they're not having this thought process of, okay, if I go, I don't want to sit in it. They're just so anxious that it's just coming out, and then they end up, sitting in their own filth. And I've worked with clients before where, yeah, they're coming home every day and there's poop in the crate. And it's very, very frustrating. But a good question is, in regards to this anxiety or boredom, how much physical and mental exercise does your dog receive daily? Exercise alone can help with anxiety. It's not going to solve anxiety. You can't just say, okay, well, your dog just needs more exercise and that'll solve it. It just doesn't work like that. But it can assist because it's going to give your dog less energy. It might make them tired, so maybe they'll sleep. But examples of physical exercise, running around, playing fetch, anything that they have to physically exert themselves. Some examples of mental exercise consists of doing just regular training like sits, downs, coming when called, etc. Doing tricks, playing games like teaching your dog how to use its nose and sniff things out. So making your dog use its brain. It's kind of like if you were to read a book, you're kind of tired after. Like after I'm done with this, I'm going to be a little tired because I'm exerting myself mentally for all this. I'm not really doing anything physically. I'm sitting in a chair, but I'm still going to be a little whooped after this just because of the mental stimulation that's going on. So same thing with dogs. If you mentally stimulate them, it will tire them out. And they say that 10 minutes of mental exercise or mental stimulation is equivalent to about 30 minutes of physical exercise. So instead of a 30-minute walk, you can do a 10-minute training session where you're pushing their brain a little bit, and you can have 10 minutes equals 30 minutes of tiredness. That's not, I didn't say that right, but physical exercise is still important because dogs need to exercise to stay healthy and everything, but mental exercise out of the two is better in regards to tiring your dog out. And then in regards to is it boredom, I have too much freedom at the bottom. Some dogs just are too young, or some dogs in general just have too much freedom, and they will get into things because they're bored and they're looking for something to do. Whether it's getting into the trash or getting into the fridge or the cupboard or whatever. So that might just be owner error, if you will, and they receive too much freedom too quickly. But all that being said, we need to figure out, is it actually separation anxiety or is it just boredom? So set up that camera, do about 10 minutes, and just watch your dog and see how it goes. Here's some ways to help. We have departure cues. We want to start off with small increments. So when we start doing the things I'm going to talk about here, we want to start off with small increments. Here's the problem. Most of us work jobs where we're gone 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Dog is left home. That's a very long time. In fact, obviously to your dog, that feels like an eternity, hence this anxiety. So sometimes we can't help it in regards to we have to go to work. That's life. But we have to figure out ways to make this better, which I'm going to explain here. But we want to teach we want to teach the dog that when the human leaves, good things happen. That's something that can be very beneficial because ultimately, yeah, we want to say, hey, when I leave, nothing bad happens. In fact, good things happen. I have medication there, and I also have daycare. Daycare, I don't know what to say about daycares in general, but you can find ones that people do in their homes where they only have a couple dogs there. There's a couple websites out there that provide dog daycares in home. So you can do it. You can bring your dog to actually someone's house where there's always somebody there, and 2 or 3 other dogs, 4 dogs, so it can be more relaxing for them, and you can use that as part of this you can use it to help. Basically, I'm not saying that's the answer. I mean, maybe for some dogs that might be the easiest answer, but that's a way to help. Medication I'm going to talk about a little bit at the end, along with other things like medication that can help. So we're going to move on to the next slide. What is a departure cue? And I mentioned it up here on the very top as my bullet point. What is a departure cue? And basically a departure cue is things that let your dog know that you're leaving. Some examples are grabbing your keys, tying your shoes, putting on a jacket. Basically your dog starts to backchain the events prior to you leaving. So dog goes, okay, you're leaving. Oh crap. But after some repetition of that, your dog goes, okay, well, you just put your shoes on before you leave. I'm going to start getting anxious when you put your shoes on. And then with repetition, okay, what happened before the shoes went on? Okay, well, they grabbed their keys before the shoes went on. Okay, I'm going to start getting anxious when the keys are grabbed because next thing is shoes. And basically they can backchain like that. So just a sequence of events that we do. And typically humans are pretty routine-oriented, either intentionally or unintentionally. I've actually heard of a dog that backchained the events all the way up to the person's alarm clock going off in the morning. So the alarm clock went off, and that's when the dog started getting anxious. What we need to do with these departure cues is we need to figure out which one starts the anxiety, that's our starting point. And then what we need to do is do these departure cues a ridiculous amount of times throughout the day, and I mean ridiculous. So you need to grab your keys, you need to put your shoes on, take your shoes off, you need to put your jacket on, take your jacket off. You need to do this, this might sound like an exaggeration, but it's not, 30, 40, 50 times a day. If you do this once or twice a day, you're probably just going to make the problem worse. So you're going to think you're helping, but realistically your dog's just going to get really anxious, and then it's probably going to be anxious for a little while after that. I mean, in the long run, could it help? Maybe, but I recommend, 30, 40 times that you put your shoes on, take them off. I know that sounds really annoying, but people, you guys that are dealing with separation anxiety already know how bad this really is. I mean, for some dogs, this is just horrible. So we need to set them up for as much success as possible. So figure out what cues you're giving off to your dog to let them know you are leaving. Kind of like the example I said, when you get the leash out, the dog gets excited. Well, when you grab your keys, the dog gets the opposite of excited, starts getting anxious. So one thing you could do in regards to the leash is you get that leash out 30, 40 times a day. Pretty soon your dog is going to stop getting excited when that leash comes out. So if you put your shoes on 20, 30, 40 times a day and take them off, then it'll become less and less of a trigger for the dog. I know that sounds ridiculous, but this is really, really tough to beat, and you really have to do it a ridiculous amount of times to accomplish what you're looking for. But that's just kind of departure cues in a nutshell. So definitely find what your dog is, figure out which one you're starting with. Find that out and then go from there. If you don't start at the right point, you might kind of be fighting a losing battle. So kind of moving on, small increments to start. There's different training protocols that we can do, and you want to start off with very, very short, small increments. One thing you can do is start off by just secluding your dog in a room while it has something good to do, just for like a minute or two. Because if you're in the same house as your dog and your dog can't be in another room without freaking out, then you're not going to have any success with you leaving the actual house. So it might be a good starting point to say, hey, you're going to go in this room, you're going to have a toy that you can lick something out of, and maybe you put some of those treats in there that we talked about, maybe put some peanut butter in there, stick it in the freezer for a little bit, and then give it to your dog. Put your dog in worst case scenario, start off in the room with your dog and let them do the good things, and with repetition, then you start to step out. I mean, every dog has a different starting point. I mean, if you can give it to your dog and you can step out and your dog's okay with it, great, then start there. But if you give it to your dog and you step out of the room and your dog's freaking out, then you need to go back into the room and just teach him that this room equals good things or what have you. Like I said, it's tough. It really is tough, but we have to start somewhere. But so start off like that. Use a room in your house. Get him comfortable being in a room by himself. When you're doing that, slowly increase the duration of you being gone. Emphasis on slowly. If you do 5 minutes the first day and he does fine with it, and then you shoot for 25 minutes, that's probably way too long, and your dog's probably going to start freaking out. The ultimate goal is to keep your dog from freaking out when this is happening. So you're trying to not allow the anxiety to actually happen. And if we're doing something to cause the anxiety, then we're not helping. We're probably going to hurt our cause. So slowly increase that duration, and you can slowly increase your distance as well, depending on the situation. So if you're in the same room, maybe you start off right next to your dog, and I mean right next to your dog, and then slowly get further and further away. And you could even do each time you do this, you're a little further away. I try to avoid too much movement when we're actually doing this, though. I don't want the dog focused on me. I want the dog focused on that interactive toy and those treats and maybe that peanut butter or something in there. But yeah, you may have to start off. You may have to start off these small increments by being right next to your dog. That might be how extreme your dog is. So kind of think of it that way. I want to get the dog to be under the impression that the human leaving equals good things. So a little graphic here, human walking out of a door or walking through a doorway, and I want that to equal power bites. I want the dog to think, okay, human leaves, party time, sort of. I don't want him to have a party, but I want him to enjoy it. Seriously, for some dogs, you might be able to give them an interactive toy, put some peanut butter in there, put the treats in there, freeze it, give it to them, and then just leave your house. And if your dog's anxiety wasn't that bad to start with, that could be enough to I don't want to say fix the problem, but to help out the situation and make your dog feel better. Some options though, and like I said, put treats in an interactive toy with peanut butter and freeze it. I like to maybe hide treats throughout the house, and you could start off by creating a game out of this when you are there. So you can say, you know, you can hide treats. You could teach them a cue to go find, and I simply say go find, and that means use your nose to go sniff out treats. It's a little bit of scent work. I have a video on that, by the way. But you could teach them that, and then when you're going to leave, you can say, all right, go find, and your dog will then, instead of being worried about you leaving, your dog will start looking for those treats instead. Hopefully, while he's looking for those treats, he kind of completely forgets, you know, what was even happening. This is similar to when like young kids have that anxiety when their parent leaves them, like at the nursery or something, where they cry because they're so focused on the parent leaving. But if you can distract them enough, before they know it, they're having a good time with doing something else, and they don't even care that their parent is gone anymore. So it's similar like that. I know this is going to sound silly, but I use some of my dog training methods on kids, and they actually work, or they do work. So, but you know, small increments, doing things, you know, give them something to do. I think, like I said in the very first slide with separation anxiety, dogs have trouble coping with being by themselves, and especially if we just see you later and walk out the door, they're like, okay, now what? I'm in a big house by myself. I don't know how to feel comfortable. I don't know what to do, and I don't have a dog's clock in my head, but I'm pretty sure they make it seem like it's a lot longer than that 8 hours. To them, it feels like it's an eternity. So definitely want to give them something to do. One thing that could work is to create a safe place, and a lot of times I actually use a crate for separation anxiety, and I use it correctly. If you do it incorrectly, a dog can really hurt themselves in a crate. So, for instance, if my dog's having horrible separation anxiety and I just stick him in a crate, well, even the picture of this metal crate on the right, I've seen dogs chew through those. I've seen dogs chew through that exact type of crate. They bite the bars. You know, they can seriously injure themselves. But if we do this correctly, meaning in the right increments, and we get further away at the right increment, and we increase the duration that they're in there at the right increment, we can teach them that good things happen in this crate, and that it's a place of calming and soothingness. I don't think that's a word, but you guys know what I'm saying. So we can introduce it to them that way, so they actually have a safe place. And if we can make them understand that that's a safe place, they'll be relaxed in it. They can lie down and just take a nap in it. But if your dog's having horrible anxiety and you just try to stick them in a crate, well, there's a good chance things won't be that excellent when you get back. Some people don't have a choice. It's either do something in the crate or tear up the entire house. Obviously, you're going to pick the crate, but then you come home and there's pee and poo all on the bottom of the crate and stuff like that, or the whole thing's filled up with drool. So if you are going to try to use a crate, what you want to do is give your dog the interactive toy, and this is how I do it. So I get that interactive toy with the treats and stuff in it. I ask the dog to go in the crate. Well, first off, I introduce the crate nicely, so I drop some treats in there, let him go in and out, and then I slowly start shutting the door and then letting them out, and then I have him go in there longer, then I let him out, and I make it all upbeat, all positive. And then when he's comfortable going in there, I ask him to go in there, and I give him that good thing, and I sit down right next to the crate, and I literally right next to the crate. And I'm sitting there for 5 minutes, and I let him finish it. After the 5 minutes is up, I will open the crate door, and I'll let him out, and it's over. And then a little bit later, same exact thing, except I'm not sitting in the same spot. I'm sitting, depending on the dog, either a foot away from where I was before, maybe 5 inches away. It's all dependent upon what the dog's going to do. Basically, I want the dog to act as if I'm not there, but if I get up and walk away, he's going to freak out, or if I'm too far away, he might freak out. So I need to do it in small increments. Running low on time here, so I'm going to try to squeeze this out real quick. But so in small increments, you slowly get further away, and you slowly increase the amount of time your dog's in that crate, all while he's doing something good, or having something enjoyable in there. So definitely freezing, the interactive toy will give him something to work on. Maybe you put multiple in there, kind of go from there. But so you can create a safe place for your dog, and if done correctly, it can help with separation anxiety. If done incorrectly, it can not help, and it can make it worse. And then I have a picture of a playpen too. Depending on the dog, that might be an option. There's a Dalmatian in there. He could jump that pretty easily. So I wouldn't recommend a big dog in a crate that size for separation anxiety, a playpen that size. But you can use, something like that depending on the size of your dog. You can also do baby gates, baby gate him into a certain room, kind of go from there. And then lastly, in regards to this, talk to your vet. There's trainers out there that say no dog ever needs to be on medication. Well, these trainers have never worked with the dogs that I've worked with in regards to separation anxiety, and I've worked with normal dogs, so I don't know what to say. Dogs with horrible anxiety, medication is something that will make them feel better. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't want to put my dog on medication, and I understand where they're coming from, but I'm here to tell you that the stress that your dog goes through when it's having this anxiety is way worse for its body than a medication that it's going to have for a short period of time. So take that into consideration. This is something that you're going to want to talk to your vet about. If you're working with a trainer, maybe your trainer can make write a letter to the vet. It's good to work as a team. So don't be turned off by that idea. Believe me, it'll make the dog feel better. It'll make you feel better in the long run. I'm not going to give recommendations of what I normally recommend, but the things that I recommend, my goal is to use it at 6 months at the most while using the training protocols that I have in place. So think of it that way. One other thing I just thought of that I want to mention before I continue with this slide is don't be afraid to put leaving on a cue, meaning when you leave, you say something to your dog like, be right back. The idea behind this is what I do is I do small increments of this. So I look at the dog, I say, be right back, I step out, I come right back in, and I toss him a treat or something. The idea behind this is the last thing the dog hears from the human is the I'll be right back, and the very next thing that happens is the human comes back and gives the dog something good. So leaving and coming back is not a horrible thing. In fact, good things happen when the human comes back. So it can kind of help with the anxiety. Back to the medicine side here, though. Don't be turned off by the idea. I know some people are, but believe me, I actually used some medication for my dog when we were dealing with the issues with other dogs when he was not too fond of other dogs. I used it as an aid, so don't be too afraid. DAP, that is dog appeasing pheromone, and this is a pheromone that's been made to mimic the same pheromone that the mother kind of gives off when they're puppies. So during the litter phases, when they're puppies. So it can give them kind of a calming and soothing effect. It comes in multiple forms. There's what we have in the picture here is a DAP diffuser. It's kind of like a Glade plug-in. You plug it into the wall, and it does in a circumference, or it does a radius there. You'll have to read the packaging. I think everyone's different, but it only does so far, so you might have to do multiple of those throughout your house. They come also in collars. They kind of look like a flea collar is the best way to describe it, but it's a DAP collar, and usually they have like lavender scent on them. Lavender is a pretty good. It's been known to help as well. And I have also a Thunder shirt. That's kind of a famous. It came along a couple years ago. Severe anxiety, Thunder shirts probably won't help with, but low levels of anxiety, Thunder shirts could help with. What it does is it hits the pressure points on the dog and helps them relax a little bit. So, I'll use things together too. I might use multiple forms of DAP. So I might get a collar, I might get a plug-in, and actually make a spray too, like a little spray bottle that you can just spray into the air. I'll use multiple forms. It's been shown that multiple forms can work better than just a single form. But yeah, like I said, don't be afraid to talk to your vet about this. And if you are working with a trainer, realistically, you, the trainer, and the vet should be working together as a team on this. If your vet and your trainer can't see eye to eye on this, it's going to be tough on you. So you're going to have to figure that out a little bit. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, though. That's going to be it. I actually kept it to about an hour, believe it or not. So where to find me? Once again, I'm located in Kent, Ohio, opening up a training facility next month. So I'll be offering group classes, all different sorts, puppy classes, regular, manners classes, stuff like that. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/alldogsgotokevin LLC, where I give a lot of tips, daily tips. I have a lot of videos posted on there too, along with my YouTube channel. I give a lot of videos on there. Obviously, that's what YouTube is for. I have my website, Dogs to Kevin. I have a blog on there that I give a lot of free tips as well, so don't be afraid to check that out. I'm on Twitter as well. I don't use Twitter as much as Facebook, but I'm on there. So that is it in a nutshell. We're going to jump into the questions and stuff. I hope everything was clear. If you have any questions about anything I said, now is going to be the time to ask. So I'm going to hand it back over to Harlan now. And whenever he picks back up, he'll take back over, and he's going to ask a question.
I'm here.
Excellent.
Okay, we've got lots of questions coming in. Now, one of the things that we talked about, and lots of our fans want to hear about, is training situations with rescue dogs. Lots of our folks have opened up their hearts, and when it comes to getting a new member of the family, they turn to their local dog rescue. They adopt. They're really big on saving dogs, and I have to applaud them. But with rescue dogs um, come a whole host of problems where you are essentially inheriting problems that you did not create. How? Let's talk about the first thing is that you get a rescue pup, and there are a whole bunch of problems. What do you do? What's the first thing that you do?
Well, that's a great question. First things first is you need to have realistic goals. So figure out what your goals are. What do you want? What is your goal? So once again, is your dog barking at other dogs? Well, your goal then is to get them to stop barking at other dogs. But yeah, you need to have realistic goals. I think really focus first off on building a good relationship with your new dog. Unfortunately, there are some dogs out there in shelters that people allowed a problem behavior to happen, and they allowed it to get worse and worse, and then they just say, you know what, I can't deal with the dog anymore, and they bring it to the shelter, and then it's someone else's problem kind of deal. So, I mean, like you mentioned, some of these dogs could potentially have some things that will need to be worked with when you adopt them. And there's obviously a bunch of dogs in the shelters that don't have any issues. But yeah, if you do get one that has the issues, first things first, have a realistic goal. What do you want? And I think I mentioned earlier on too, a lot of people's first reaction is to just jump right into punishment. Dogs jumping on the counter, let's just smack them to get off, something along those lines. I'm here to tell you, you need to focus on clear communication. Really focus on telling your dog what you want it to do, and focus on teaching your dog what you'd like it to do. And you'd be surprised or maybe you won't be surprised, depending on how long you've been training dogs for and the style you've been using, but when you're using these positive reinforcement methods, things will start coming into shape really, really quickly, and you'll start having the dog that you're looking for, the results you're looking for. So that's kind of a good piece of advice there. And just like with any dog, don't be afraid to use like a leash inside your house. Don't give them too much freedom too quickly. Just be kind of on your toes and kind of like that. So just be on your toes, I guess, and be proactive instead of reactive.
Okay, that's really, really good, helpful stuff. And all of the things that you said, I suppose that you taught today, I suppose they apply to rescue dogs just as well.
You mean, yeah, regular dogs just as well?
Yeah. Okay, let's get to some of the questions, and there are so many. There's no way we're going to get to all of them. I have a foster dog, a female pointer mix, 3 years old, who was traumatized by the owner, dying and be left with 5 other dogs without food or water for a long time. She came to me with heartworms and parasites. She's free of worms now. She's somewhat aggressive with other dogs. I'm trying to socialize her. What do I do?
Well, great question. First off, great job rescuing her, and it's not easy when you're dealing with this issue. And like I said, I went through it myself. What I did was I did the whole look at that game that I mentioned in the reactivity slide. So I got my dog to look at it, and then I rewarded him. So I did that counter conditioning and desensitization. Part of what I did too is I didn't allow him to physically meet any new dogs for basically an entire year. I let him meet the dogs that I knew he was okay with, but no new dogs that he physically meet. So sniff, anything like that. I took him to a bunch of just training classes. I didn't care what the class was in regards to, was it agility, was it obedience, was it anything like that. I didn't care what it was. I did everything in the class, but my goal there was to get him socialized with other dogs. So he was around them. Every time he looked at another dog, I said, good boy, rewarded him. And basically you just need a bunch of exposure like that, and you really need to make sure that nothing bad happens. So don't use the dog parks or anything like that, obviously. But if you do have like a local dog park near you, you could walk around the outside of it, and you could reward her every time she looks at the other dogs, and start going from there. And it'll take some time, but you should start to see results. I'd say at worst you can get her to tolerate being around other dogs. At best, you'll get her to enjoy the presence of other dogs. So it's kind of how I look at it.
We got a super question in from Brandy on the Dogington Post team. Does Kevin have any advice for shelter volunteers? For example, someone has only a few minutes to work with a dog to help them be more easily adopted. What should they focus on?
That's a great question. Thanks for the question there, Brandy. Basic manners. I mean, just teaching the dog how to sit. I mentioned in the last webinar that sitting is a good alternative to jumping. So one thing that I do when I'm at a shelter is I'll just walk up to the crate, or excuse me, to the cage, whatever you call it, and I'll stand in front of the door and I'll either ask the dog to sit, or if I have a little bit of a relationship, like I've done this once or twice in this same session, I'll wait for the dog to sit. But once it sits, I'll start rewarding it. And what ends up happening is, with repetition of this, and it doesn't take much repetition, the dog will start sitting when people walk up to the crate, or whatever you call it, the run, the cage. I'm having trouble with the wordage there. But so that means when potential adopters are walking up, they're going to walk up, stand in front of it, and instead of the dog jumping all over, it'll be sitting instead. You know, and for like dog walkers, the volunteers that are walking, these dogs have a lot of pent-up energy, understandably. And one of the main issues is like biting on the leash, things like that. So what I do is I'll take some treats with me. As soon as the leash goes in the mouth, you know, I'll introduce a drop it cue, either by doing like a swap method. So I'll say drop, and then I'll present a treat, and then I'll start introducing like leave it and stuff. You'd be surprised what you can do with just a little bit of time and a little bit of treats with shelter dogs, because they really can be very, very smart dogs, and they're very willing to learn, especially to get some great interaction from the human and some great treats as well. So, but sitting is a really easy one when you walk up to the crate. That's going to get more dogs adopted.
Okay. Here we go. I have 3 Chihuahuas. The 2 females are leash aggressive. They seem to be in a competition. The older one learned this behavior from the younger one. I had the older one first, and she was never like this before I adopted the younger one. What can I do?
You know, this is when people have multiple dogs. Dogs can feed off of one another. My advice is to work with each dog individually first. So take one dog out at a time. Work on these things that I mentioned, like desensitization and counter conditioning. So get that dog to look at it, and then reward it. And then when each dog is doing good individually, then you mesh them together. Trying to do 2 dogs at once, even the greatest trainers in the world will have trouble with that. It's just too much to take in. It's one at a time. You're gonna have a lot more success if you do one at a time. So do one at a time and then put them together.
Let me say something and jump in. One of my neighbors went to a shelter, and they already have 2 Yorkies that are untrained, undisciplined, untrained, and they walk them together. They use one of those extender leashes, so the dogs are going in different directions at the same time. They went to a shelter, and they brought back dog number 3. No acclimation to the other dogs, brought the dog into the house. The 3 dogs immediately didn't get along and started walking all 3 at the same time. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, first things first, when you're bringing a new dog home, if you haven't already, you know, so a lot of times when you're bringing a new dog home from a shelter, usually you bring your other dog there so they meet and you know things are going well. If that doesn't happen and you're bringing a new dog home, I recommend maybe taking the new dog, and this is going to be a little counterintuitive or a little it's going to, basically I recommend walking them together first just to get them used to each other out and about and not in the house, and then you bring them back into the house. Now when you're dealing with, as you mentioned, some dogs that are all over the place like that, I might still do it, but really you still need to work on individual training with each dog and then start putting it together. It really is a common problem though when you have multiple dogs that are reacting, and then you're like, okay, what do I do? But the answer still comes down to work individually with each dog individually first and then put them together. But another thing too I'd like to add is I think unless you already have your dog where you want it to be, your first dog, I think you're putting a lot of stress on yourself by adding in another dog before you're ready. So if your dog still has some things you want to work on, my recommendation is to get those accomplished first and then add another dog in before you add the other dog in before it's time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So keep that in mind though.
Okay. Gosh, there's so many questions. I'm going to make this the last one, but we're going to continue the conversation on the Merrick Facebook page. If you have a question that didn't get answered, I do apologize, but we will continue the conversation on the Merrick Facebook page. So if you have questions for Kevin or about using their treats and training, head over there. And also tonight there'll be a post that has a coupon for $1 off. So here's our last question for now before we have our giveaway. Question. Iris says she's rescued a sweet female Maltipoo who was pretty fearful with loud noises about 3 years ago. about 3 months ago, I'm sorry. She's doing better with her pottying, but she promptly peed over and over on the area rugs in most of the rooms of the house. We took up most of the rugs and made a delighted scene when she potties outdoors. She has a doggy door. But are there other tips on how to retrain a rescue dog to go outdoors with a doggy door access?
Basically, one of the when I'm working with dogs that are having issues eliminating in the house still, what needs to be done is if your dog's still having accidents, you need to go outside every single time with it and reward the appropriate behavior. So you need to use those treats and say, hey, this is the correct spot. I would probably eliminate the doggy door until that time basically. So I wouldn't use the doggy door at all until we know that the dog has a good idea of where is right and where is wrong. Because at this point, anyway, I don't think the dog door is any real concept to her. But I would definitely recommend making sure that, and it sounds like you guys already did a good job of this, but making sure there's no scent at all left over from the urine. So get like an enzymatic cleaner that breaks down the enzymes in there. And if we have a recording of the last webinar too that's going to be up soon, where I talk about soiling in the house, and I give a lot of good points in there that talk about the best ways to curb that behavior. So I recommend you take a listen to that because I talked about it for a good 20 minutes or something. So a lot of good answers in there. But once the dog starts understanding, okay, this is where I'm supposed to go, then you could start introducing the dog door if you still want to do that. So.
Okay. Well, here we go. We're ready with our question. Now, I'm just going to warn everybody that you are competing against the greatest minds in the dog world today and the fastest typers. So get ready. Here we go. This is the toughest one that we've had so far, and the first one in gets them. It has 3 answers to this. Here we go. What 3 behavioral issues did Kevin cover in today's webinar? We need all 3. Oh, let's see. And our winner, that was quick. Not only can she, not only did she know the answer, but she types pretty quickly. Is Linda Easley? Congratulations, Lindsay Easley. Congratulations. If you would send us an email to dogingtonpost@gmail.com with your contact information, we will get that over to Merrick, and they will send you 4 bags of Merrick Power Bites, and they'll also donate 4 bags to a shelter near you. So get that into us. Kevin, there are so many questions here I did not get a chance to answer, and so many people came in right afterwards. Everybody's really enjoying this. We're going to have to do this again. So thanks all of you for coming. Thank you, Kevin. Go over to Merrick Pet Care on Facebook to continue the conversation. Remember, the best dog ever deserves the best food ever. The best dog ever deserves Merrick. Thank you all for being here. Everybody, have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.